Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the All in Crypto podcast. I am your host, All in Crypto, and today I am both delighted and excited to be joined by Pete, one of the co-founders of Cudos Network. Welcome on board, Pete. How are you doing?
I'm very good, thank you very much. And that makes two of us, by the way, delighted and excited. So yeah, thank you very much for inviting me along today. I'm doing very well. The sun is shining. I'm on the south coast of the UK and spring is finally starting to come through. So if you're listening to this in 9 months' time, it's irrelevant, but we're feeling good today.
Fantastic. And I'm on the other end of the spectrum. I'm all the way up north and it's rainy and miserable here. But hopefully we can kind of even each other out in regards to the kind of weather spectrum. So really excited to do this interview. This idea of decentralized computing for me is huge. You know, I spoke to you a little bit off camera there about the fact that I actually think this is as much of a narrative in the world that we're moving towards, where computing is going to play an oil-like role as decentralizing money. You know, if you look at how important the kind of powerhouse behind computing already is in this kind of Web2 world, Web3 and the digitalization of everything is only going to really amplify that. And I think we absolutely need to decentralize that. So super excited about doing this interview. And with all my guests, I really like to start off with them. So if you could maybe give us a bit of an introduction into yourself and kind of how you ended up in the crypto space, that'd be wonderful.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Pete. I'm one of the co-founders at Cudos, as you mentioned at the beginning. How did I get into this space? Okay, so 2008, left university, went and started working for a friend that I'd known for about 7 years, as a incident of not getting a job at Microsoft and going for one of the postgraduate interview. And I think I got down from 11,000 to 8 people, and the 7 people that they actually hired were people that had done a year's worth of intern there. So it felt like a bit of a tick box exercise that they were going through. But anyhow, I'm not bitter about it because it's gone to great things. So start working for a friend. That friend happens to be the CEO and fellow co-founder of Cudos as well. So, we've continued working together all these years, but that was in the data center industry, the previous business, and predominantly within the UK. But we effectively built a data center marketplace. So the way that we were approached that business was, we found it difficult at the beginning, or Matt found it difficult at the beginning when he started in 2000, to bring some servers online to support his website that was his business at that current time, and find the right facility to put that in, to find the right connectivity provider to give them internet, and so on and so forth. And you had all of these different suppliers that you had to build relationships and kind of bring that together. And it kind of sparked that, hang on a minute, if I bundle that together and create that as a service, there'll be lots of other small businesses out there like myself that will find it easier to be able to get their websites up and running, their services up and running. So that was kind of birth of that company. It grew a lot, before I joined in 2008. And by that time, it was probably across about 13, 14 data centers. It scaled all the way up to about 45 to 50 data centers by the time it was sold in 2016. That included us taking space within existing branded data centers across the UK, but also building our own one down here on the south coast, which is where we still are. Not in the data center. I don't live in the data center. It'd be a bit cold. And then we connected that up with dark fiber networks and everything. So that's the kind of the reality that we came from before. And our main customer within that business was your cloud service providers that were starting to come through. Now, at the beginning, they weren't called cloud service providers, because cloud was a relatively new term, kind of around about 2008, 2009 when I started. But as that terminology got adopted, then they became known as cloud service providers. And we saw like this really, really common problem that all of them were facing, particularly as the likes of Amazon AWS started growing. Yeah, not to forget, Amazon AWS was very, very new at that time, and Microsoft and Google Cloud weren't even out at that point, right? So, and then in the latter years, Microsoft Azure and Google Cloud, as they started growing and started taking that market share. And the problem is that everyone uses the internet more and more and more, right? So at first it was for browsing, then it became, you know, our work systems, then it became our TV streaming and everything, right? So we're a hyper-connected, market of people that need services from the internet. And so as a cloud service provider, you've constantly got to build to the peak of those to those markets, right? So if you've got customers coming on and they're going to have, you know, times in the day where they're going to be using more compute resource than other times in the day, you need to make sure you've got that maximum amount in that all of those customers you've got are going to be using. Which means that in the non-peak hours, of course, you have this heavy underutilization. So it's kind of, so we looked at that and we thought, you know, our sales, what were we doing? We were selling them the space and power. So the space and power is a 24/7 charge. So we're charging them 24/7, but they might only be making revenue for, let's say, 12 to 16 hours a day. So they've got that gap. And it's like, how can we find something that fills that gap for them, makes them more profitable, gives them new revenue streams coming into their business. But also we could even look to pair users up from other regions into that gap that they're not focused on, right? So if they're a UK provider, they might not have customers, or they might not be targeting people in, say, the Middle East or Australia as a kind of an extreme. But they've got opposite peaks and opposite non-peaks. So right, so how can we kind of marry that together and everyone wins, and that kind of protects them from losing a bit of market share to those big hyperscale clouds as well. So that was the basis of it, right? So a bit of a long-winded story, but just kind of want to give you the kind of backgrounds on that. And that first time we saw that problem was around about 2010, 2011. We looked at what the technologies were out there. We looked at the kind of sentiment of the market as well, right? So that's really important. You can have great technology, but unless there's a market fit, you know, that's never going to take off as a product. And it wasn't there at the time, right? So, you know, there was, like I said, cloud was really just taking off, accelerating that point, and particularly with those kind of early stage, what we call hyperscalers now, AWS, etc. So we kind of parked that idea and just went, we'll revisit this at the right time, but the right time's not now. So fast forward 2016, we looked at the kind of market again and said, actually, this could work now. Everyone's got there's super fast fiber everywhere, right? That's already an advancement from 5 or 6 years previous to that. So the speed is there. You know, we're much more of a global economy now as well, right? So globalization is just accelerating, and so forth. So we're all connected. And the sharing economy, things like Airbnb and Uber were common names. People understood what the sharing economy was now, and were comfortable with it and familiar with it. So it's like, well, can't we apply that to cloud computing in a sense, right? It's just another asset that can have, you know, underutilization, just like a person's bedroom or a person's car. So, you know, apply that same kind of theory to it. And the other thing we wanted to do was like, we want, you know, you could see the growth pattern of cloud computing, and whilst, you know, those servers are running in data centers, you know, which are typically more efficient on the cooling and you know, maybe there's more kind of renewables in the power mix as well. It's like, this is going to become a really big problem for the environment. And so how can we build a more sustainable kind of version of our business as it is? Anyway, so 2016, that was acquired by another company. We exited from that, and that formed the basis of, right, let's go and build Cudo, and transform from this, or transition, should I say, from this data center marketplace to a cloud marketplace. And we can aggregate all of those different cloud service providers from around the world. A lot of the ones that we've been working with, a lot of the ones that we've never spoken to, but, you know, aggregate all of those cloud service providers environments from around the world. Put a particular focus on the ones that are being powered by sustainable energy, so preferably renewable energy, but, you know, nuclear would come into that mix, and there's other types of carbon reduction technologies as well that would be considered. Bring that all together, and then as a consumer, as a user of cloud computing, you're still using one cloud provider, but behind the scenes, actually, that's being distributed across all of these different countries, regions, different specialists in high performance and low performance type computing areas, etc., etc. So that was kind of what Cudo became. It's a you know, cloud computing marketplace. And then we added the blockchain element. And by the way, just to make this really clear for everyone, if you put an S on the end of Cudo, that's everything that we do that is related to blockchain. So Cudos is kind of our Web3 side of things. That's the kind of delineation that we provide. And the reason for that, not the naming, but the reason for us stepping into that kind of blockchain space is because we're on that transition to Web3 from Web2. You know, we'll look back in 10 years and we won't call it Web3, it'll just be the internet, right? As we call the internet now. But, you know, from inside this sphere, inside this industry, we're going from Web2 to Web3. That transition is happening. It takes years, it takes decades for that to happen, but it is happening. And so we, you know, as a new platform, as a new technology, as a new way of being able to do cloud, it's super, super important that we are thinking ahead and we're making sure that we are ready and we have, you know, the platform in place for Web3, because that is where the growth is going to accelerate. And that is where people transition into. So you need to be ahead of the game, right? And we need to make sure that the infrastructure is in place and it's correct for that side.
Yeah.
So that's that piece. For me personally, to get into blockchain, that came around about 2016 as well. That company was being sold, looking at different things. I was hearing about Bitcoin. I was talking to a few people about Bitcoin. Our CTO actually had mined some Bitcoin back in 2010, believe it or not.
Oh, wow.
But he was one of the unlucky ones that got rid of his laptop because it didn't have any value at that time, and we won't bring that up. Bit of a sore subject, but you know, so you know, we'd heard of it a few times. Being a data center company before, we'd had a few of the early kind of ASIC miners calling us and saying, "Have you got space?" And then so we heard about it, but I really started kind of getting into it in 2016, 2017. Of course, it then went into that amazing bull run, and you're like, "Wow, I'm hooked." And then you start going into Ethereum and you know all of the other coins, platforms, protocols that were coming out in that time. And I think it's just like anyone, it's just a rabbit hole, isn't it? And here we are.
Here we are. Yeah, no, that's absolutely fascinating. I love how, because that sort of perhaps start or jump that you had in regards to data centers, that would have really allowed you to really understand the trend of the world that we're moving towards. You know, the need for data back when you got into it, okay, it was needed, but it would have been a fraction of where we currently are today and the need for data. Computing is the exact same thing. And it's very interesting how when we talk about Amazon Web Services and things like that, people think these have been around for, you know, tens of years or 20, 30 years. They really haven't. It's really a very small timeline that these things have existed. However, if you look at Amazon and you look at how where their profits and their kind of business model is now becoming more and more derived from, it's computing. So we can see this trend with data, we can see this trend with computing, we can see this trend more broadly in regards to the digital world that we're moving towards, that everything is going in that direction. And the amazing thing about Web3 or crypto is it finds itself at the convergence of pretty much all industries and the kind of enabling. It's almost like a missing piece of a puzzle to most industries, whether that be finance, whether that be computing, whether that be data storage, whether that be identity. You know, you've got this kind of Web3 blockchain element popping up all over the place. It's amazing how, and you said your involvement in 2016, you arguably got in a great time for what took place in 2017. It's amazing how what was a very speculative space, I think, for most of us, when the markets kind of crashed and, you know, we all know what happened in 2018, 19, then I think a lot of people went, actually, okay, this law of almost buying a scratch card has kind of gone a little bit. What we're left with is a real technology here that is kind of transforming the world in many different ways. And I think why I was so excited about interviewing you is not only because I understand how big cloud computing is going to be, but also because I kind of understand just the role of these current cloud computing providers and why we need to kind of move away from that a little bit and help to decentralize it. So one thing, and I want to get into all of the different elements in regards to what you spoke about there. One thing I really want to start on, because a lot of our viewers they might have heard of cloud computing, but do you think, as somebody that's very well positioned to explain this, you could perhaps conceptualize cloud computing for people that may not be that familiar with it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think consider what we're doing here, right? So right now I'm speaking to you from Bournemouth, from the south coast of the UK. You're in Edinburgh, up in Bonnie, Scotland. Your accent will transform soon, by the way. I'm sure of it.
Hopefully
Uh,
not.
and
Well,
we're
hopefully
doing
so, actually. Yeah.
and we're doing this over a video call, right? And the link in between that's enabling us to do that is a bunch of servers that are in a fully secure data center facility. So a big warehouse effectively that is properly cooled, because obviously the servers are generating lots of heat. So times that by tens of thousands, and you can imagine kind of the heat that produces. So, it's hitting these highly efficient servers, very, very powerful, expensive servers that are in these data center facilities that have top-notch security, round the clock. They have engineers on site that are around the clock that are looking after them and making sure that those systems are staying up. So that's kind of an infrastructure layer. And then now we're talking about the application that's running on top of that infrastructure is at present we're recording on Zoom, right? So and for you at home that's watching this, you're going to be watching this on YouTube, right? So you're watching it from these kind of platforms, and all of that kind of data that you're streaming, that you're essentially downloading to be able to watch us right now, is coming from those servers in the data center, which is what we call the cloud, because it's a much easier conceptually, I guess, name to be able to kind of digest. Not at first, it wasn't. It was always having to say it's just become part of our lingo, part of our narrative over time, and that's through education, through repetition, through through branding and marketing and everything like that, to be able to understand it. But that's kind of the basis of cloud.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, when we think about the internet, we don't really think about what's behind it. Okay, we know the platforms, we know this, but what people don't realize is there's actually a crossover to the physical world there in regards to the infrastructure. We mentioned data, we've mentioned compute, even things like network. You need towers and things that generate signals and whatever it may be. There's a physical element to all of this. And actually, in most cases, a lot of the physical infrastructure that the internet is basically enabled off of is owned by majority stakeholders of the three big companies: Amazon, Microsoft, and Google at this point. You could argue that that's sort of trending down a little bit, but they basically own all of the infrastructure, or most of the infrastructure. They've got the lion's share in regards to how the internet works, and that gives them this huge amount of power, in my opinion. I don't know if you've ever heard the term cloud lords be thrown around.
Yes. Yeah.
What do you think about that?
I mean, it's spot on. I mean, I would even chuck Meta into that as well.
Yep.
And okay, so Amazon AWS, Microsoft Azure, Google,
Google, that's a new one. Yeah.
GCP, so Google Cloud. I think there's actually 24 recognized or defined as hyperscalers. So these are kind of public cloud platforms that would include, if you go to China, you've got Tencent, you've got Alibaba, you've also got IBM, you've got Oracle, and so on and so forth. But the big three are the ones you mentioned. But then you've got kind of these private clouds, and Meta is absolutely one of those. And then you've got Salesforce will have their own one, and LinkedIn and stuff like that. So some of the big SaaS companies will also have their own kind of big private clouds, which is just for their services, and running on their infrastructure. But yeah, you're absolutely right. If you look at the way that data center investment and data center build outs are happening globally, the vast majority of that is happening by the hyperscalers themselves. So they're commissioning companies in each of the regions to build in these huge, let's call them server factories, if you like. They are at times installing their own dark fiber underneath the sea, so the subsea cables. The boats with the big spools on the back of them, and they're dropping the undersea cables down to create faster, straighter lines between two regions. So that's for something called latency, if you're familiar with that. So latency is the speed over a network. If you're playing a game online, that latency needs to be very, very low, because you don't want it to jitter. You don't want to have that lag. So yeah, there's a huge amount of infrastructure that's going in, and I think Cloud Lord sums it up quite nicely, because they're the ones that have been investing heavily into that infrastructure. Whilst that's good, it's advanced us in a way, and you know, let's not be too detrimental to them, because they've done a really good job and accelerated a lot of things. But it does give them a lot of control, and you know, and this is why, you know, if you're, especially if you're reading kind of industry press and you hear about, you know, Google or Amazon, or you know, Meta, or potentially even Apple being pulled up by the courts about this kind of monopoly or oligopoly, and you know, having to split up their businesses, and there's lots of pressure from the EU and different, you know, governments from around the world. It's because of that. It's because they're, you know, they're seen to, that level of control they've got is seen to be a threat by many, I guess.
Yeah, and I think potentially it becomes more and more of a threat. I do like what you said there about let's not demonize them too much, because they have done a hell of a lot of good. You know, I mean, look at what we're doing right now. Look at what our lives have changed, I think, in many cases for the better by a lot of what's been done by these big companies. But I do think at the same time, there's an overstepping perhaps in certain areas. I think there was a lot of outrage recently in regards to what came out between Meta and Netflix in regards to the personal messaging and how they were looking to use that. I don't quite know the exact in and outs of that. And I think, as always with the media, it kind of grows arms and legs a little bit. But there needs to be, in my opinion, I'm sure yours as well, healthy competition around this, and actually sort of, I don't know if you could break these companies up. I don't know if you need to, but you certainly need to encourage competition. And I think Web3 is certainly doing that. What you guys are doing is certainly doing that. Before we move on to Cudo and Cudos itself, could we maybe talk, or you give an opinion on why you think it's important that we decentralize the likes of cloud computing, you know, and maybe perhaps from a philosophical point of view, but also actually from a kind of fundamental point of view, because it seems to me that decentralized cloud computing offers a lot of advantages. Probably one of the maybe not most important, but significant ones is price, security, you know, all of these kind of things. Maybe you could sort of explore that realm a little bit.
Yeah. So I think if we let's look at some other industries first, because I think this will help, right? So, and I'm saying the kind of oil and gas industry, because, or let's just particularly the oil industry, because they call data the new oil, right? So there's a kind of relevance there. But if you look at the oil industry, right? So one of the biggest companies in the world is Saudi Aramco, right? And Saudi Aramco, they produce billions of barrels of oil per year from the Middle East, you know, from Saudi Arabia. You've also got BP, you've got ExxonMobil, you've got and so on and so forth, right? So you've got these big oil companies. Now, what do? They control the price of oil on the market. They've got so much control, they've got so much power that they're able to control the price. They can hold back on the supply, they can put an over demand into it, and they can really kind of, you know, control that oil price, which we see all the time, right? So that's happening. We've become very used to it. Now, if you now move that into the 21st century oil data, you know, who owns all of that data? Well, you know, the majority of us are all consuming cloud services from the big hyperscalers, which means that their storage clusters are where all of that data is sitting, or a lot, the vast majority of the world's data is sat there. And so they're controlling that data, and you know, by controlling that data, it means that you have to use they've created that kind of that moat, if you like, that means that you have to use their services, or a lot of enterprises have to use their services, and therefore they can control that price, right? So exactly how you said, and going back to that previous point, it's not demonize them. They've made extremely good businesses, right? They've absolutely served that purpose, and that's because the technology at the time needed those kind of big centralized type companies to be able to accelerate, to meet the demands of our internet needs, all of our internet needs, whether that's going to be business or social or casual, right? So that's there. But blockchain has come along and it's offered us the ability to be able to do it in a different way. And it's the first time it's allowed us to be able to do it in a different way with efficiencies, right? So in a way that actually can significantly bring down the cost for everyone. And that's what's really kind of exciting. So for the first time, particularly within computing, we have this opportunity to do distributed or decentralized computing, right? So there's slight differences between those two, but there's a lot of parallels as well, whereby you create this kind of fairer model, not just for the consumer, but also for anyone can technically become a cloud provider. Technically can become a cloud provider, right? As long as, and so it just means that all of those cloud service providers that we used to work with, if you remember right at the beginning of this interview, I told about, they were losing market share to these hyperscalers as they were growing aggressively. Now, these cloud service providers we were working with, they weren't necessarily small companies, they weren't small outfits. They might have still been 100 staff, maybe even 10,000 staff. One country, maybe even 20 countries that they had infrastructure across, right? There might have been 1 million turnover, there might have been 1 billion turnover, but they just weren't 100 billion turnover, right? So that's the difference. So there's still very, very good operators, running in these professional facilities, adhering to all the certifications and qualifications that's required to be able to run different types of computing workload. But they were losing market share. So this gives an opportunity to be able to distribute that back out again. So to give that market share back and to give those smaller companies the opportunity to be able to win on larger deals, because they're no longer having to facilitate that entire deal themselves. It's distributed across a wider set. So it's a kind of a more democratized, kind of version of that is how at least we've built it. And then when you start talking about full decentralization, right, where the code is able to become that cloud service provider, and then anyone, even you and I with our gaming PCs or consoles or electric vehicles or what with smart fridges maybe in the future, because everything is growing in processing power, will be able to connect to it and become part of the supply into that network, and that software is doing all the hard work, and you're essentially you're just providing the input to that in terms of an infrastructure point of view. At that point, you get full decentralization, and everyone really can become a cloud service provider, no matter how small a contribution or how large a contribution. And I think that's really, really exciting, because we've got the explosion of AI. There's the fear factor that people are industries, entire kind of careers are going to be lost because of of AI coming in. We always evolve as humans, and we always find a new way, and we always find something to evolve into is what's going to be next. And this kind of the blockchain and decentralization gives the opportunity for you to earn in many, 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 many different ways. Whereas beforehand, it was just the big centralized companies in those industries that would be able to reap the benefits, right? So so I think that's really, really, from a philosophical point of view, I think that's really poetic. I think that's really really beautiful in a way.
Just before you dive on to sort of more of a fundamental point of view, I want to sort of extend just very quickly on the philosophical point that you meant there, because I'm totally with you on that. If people look back to the agricultural revolution, that displaced millions of workers with the rise of machinery, with the rise of essentially a new technology. I do believe AI is going to do a similar thing. I think that's very much the trend. I think a computer can do certain things just better than a human being can. However, the point that you touched on in regards to us being very resilient as a kind of species is that we will evolve to different kinds of jobs, just like we saw previously after people were displaced from the agricultural revolution. And this is where I think, and this is why I think computing is as important, certainly the decentralization of it, as money, because the role money is going to play in a digitalized world, it's not going to look the same as essentially what it is today.
Yeah.
And this is where, when you talk about that kind of true decentralization and this ability to earn from your devices and whatever it may be, and this is what I think the real metaverse is. I don't think it's necessarily a game. I think it's a digital world, basically. It's fascinating, and computing, again, back to your analogy, is going to be the oil of all of this. So I think that's a fascinating point, and philosophically, absolutely, it's what's coming. But yeah, no, fundamentally, decentralizing things. Sorry to interrupt you there.
No, not at all. I completely agree with everything you're saying. I think fundamentally, and it's really that data, or the amount of data that we're capturing every year, and this is a really old stat now, so I'm probably way out of date, and it's accelerated even further. But we used to capture the same amount of data in the past 12 months as the entire human history before that. And then every single 12 months, the entire human history before that, right? Including that record breaking previous year. So that's probably accelerated more, right? So there's a ton of data out there. It's all going to the big, hyperscalers predominantly. But being able to decentralize that data has become really important. Think of potential future threats where if someone could get into that data that's all centralized and the amount we're capturing, and with the AI tools we've got, what could actually be done with that, right? So there's a real kind of safety security thing within the kind of decentralized distributed kind of topology that you can achieve with that. So I think that's the main kind of fundamental here, and of course, that is security. Having that distribution is one, you're stopping any single centralized entity from potentially having too much control and being able to control the kind of the pricing and everything around it. But you're also preventing, any malicious actor or malicious actors being able to access that kind of centralized data pool, because everyone's got a tiny fraction of it absolutely everywhere, right? And so that's much harder to kind of bring together. So that's kind of where I'll leave it on the fundamental pieces. There's probably more that we could go into on a second, third, fourth, fifth session.
For sure, absolutely, yeah, for sure. And again, talking about your point, if this one company owns all the data and you start deriving AI models from that, you can see very interesting narratives get pushed as a result of that. So there's absolutely the need for this wider pool of things. I want to come really onto Cudos now and just talk. We've kind of set the stage here for you guys as a participant. How is it that you guys are enabling cloud computing? So we've introduced Cudo before. Let's maybe break that down further and talk about how you guys fit into this world and are kind of trying to evolve it.
Yeah, so the first thing we did is we built a cloud computing marketplace. So within the compute ecosystem that we built a cloud computing marketplace. That product is called Cudo Compute. It's exactly how I said at the beginning, that it aggregates lots of different service provider environments from around the world. That's kind of version 1, if you like. The future vision is absolutely to connect consumer edge devices as well. But right now, the market demand, because of this explosion in AI that needs all of this power hungry, always on, high bandwidth type environments, that's much better suited to these service provider environments now. But rather than sticking it all into one, that's distributed across a global network of different underlying service providers in different locations. And then we have built something called Cudos into Cloud. And I think this is what kind of gets interesting for the All in Crypto channel here, is that this is the Web3 part of it. So, as a person that is coming from a blockchain ecosystem, so, whether that's coming from our own one, whether it's coming from Ethereum, whether it's coming from Binance Smart Chain, Avalanche, whatever it's going to be, your native experience within that ecosystem is paying with token. It's permissionless, right? So that, again, this comes back to the kind of philosophical part of things. It's being able to, we don't want to give our data to everyone, personal data to everyone. And so, if you're a developer, and all applications, whether they're not decentralized or they are decentralized, i.e. dApps, need computing power, right? So your metaverses, your blockchain games, your DeFi applications, even the protocols themselves, and how their networks are run by validators, these independent node operators that are supporting the network, all needs computing power. So what Cudos into Cloud does is it provides you with a way from multiple different chains, and we'll keep expanding, to connect a wallet. At the moment, we support MetaMask, we support Kepler. Top up with the coin that is native to you. Again, we support, I think, about 5 or 6 at the moment, but that's going to keep expanding. And access all of that scalable compute that is on that underlying network. Right, so it's essentially a Web3 access point, smart contract access point to that underlying Cudo compute network.
Which is decentralized in the sense that it's not one centralized. It's a marketplace essentially. Is this where the link takes place? You kind of so you've got this Web3 element, and this is the thing. I always get this question: why does something need a token? And it's a really basic question that I think people have kind of a pretext going into. Satoshi didn't just figure out how to sort of do it. He also figured out how to incentivize people to do it. And this is where I think the Cudos token comes in, if that makes sense.
It's a bit of everything really, and you know, some of the utility actually is still to be developed and come out. But from a if I kind of when we looked at different blockchain ecosystems to build to build, you know, this compute idea, this vision that we had, right? So if we rewind and we're going, do we go and build this in Ethereum? Do we go and build this here? You know, we looked at all of the different benefits, pros and cons of everything, and you know, for if you can imagine that there's going to be, you know, potentially thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, even millions of microtransactions per day as people are paying for a little bit of compute here. They're doing an API call or something along those lines. They're spinning up a machine here. That machine is doing some processing and needs to make another transaction. That already rules Ethereum out, right? Because it would be way too expensive, and it would be too slow. There weren't layer twos out there like Optimism, Arbitrum, or anything like that at the time. So then we started looking at elsewhere, and we settled on the Cosmos ecosystem because it supported fast transaction throughput, low cost transactions as well. So it very much supported that narrative. They were building a lot of kind of interoperability technology. So it wasn't live at the time, but it is now, and it works really, really well. So something called IBC, so the Inter-Blockchain Communication Protocol. And initially that was, you know, within the Cosmos ecosystem, which is already about 100 plus chains, but actually IBC is being tested now outside of the Cosmos ecosystem as well, which is great. So we're gradually kind of bringing all those siloed islands of different blockchains together in a sensible way. So we settled on the Cosmos ecosystem, but the other key point for that was we looked at, you know, if we had to build something proprietary, because if we wanted to make a wholesale change at some point, we couldn't be waiting for the layer one that we built on to have a major update. You know, so, you know, you see these Ethereum major updates that happen like every 6 to 12 months or so. We might not be able to wait for that, right? It might damage our business, you know, our own roadmap. So we kind of had to say, right, so where is the best way to do that? And we looked at Cosmos, and the Cosmos SDK is a bunch of Lego bricks, is the way I like to refer to it. You can pick out those Lego bricks. You can build your own proprietary chain using already kind of tested technology. And if one fundamental bit needs to be changed, needs to be heavy customized, you can knock it out and you can replace it with your own Lego brick. So it was just the best fit for what we needed at the time, and that was the kind of, you know, the reason why we had to build our own blockchain in the first place. But we did it with, you know, existing technology that was out there.
And I think that's why a lot of people build on Cosmos, because it offers that kit, if you will, that you can sort of customize your own blockchain as a result of. We've interviewed lots of sort of people that were helping to build that or sort of found the SDK. So I'm totally on board with that. Yeah.
And it made a lot of sense. So coming on to the token, then, you know, the Cosmos ecosystem is all proof of stake. So, you know, the token initially is a staking token, right? So this is a way to incentivize the network growth, to get people on there, to get people secure in the network. You know, staking provides a really good utility for that, or, you know, a way for that to happen. But, you know, ultimately it becomes a way to be able to buy and sell computing power as well. There's lots of people within our ecosystem that Cudos is native to them, and so they want to be able to pay in that. So maybe they're running validators as an example. They're already earning the Cudos tokens, so they want to be able to pay for that infrastructure in Cudos tokens without having to do an exchange. And the same will be true with, you know, with other blockchains that we connect them into us, except the difference will be as it comes into our ecosystem, we then use it as a medium of exchange. So then the Cudos token becomes a way to pay suppliers that's the bit that we're still working on, and it will be built, but an incentivized way for suppliers to be able to earn in Kudos on there as well. So so yeah, there's multiple utilities, but of course, as soon as you build a layer one, that you need that kind of currency for that layer one, and that's kind of why the token was important. Yeah.
Of course, I love what you touched on there in regards to, you know, when we think of Web3, we think of something like Ethereum, we think it's like really decentralized, and it is from many sort of points of view. But when you look at the actual infrastructure that enables Ethereum, 30%, I think, plus of all Ethereum nodes, not even going into dApps and where they get their compute from or data, runs on Amazon Web Services.
Yes. Yes.
So you've got this kind of contradiction or reintroduction of centralization that's currently happening with Web3. So not only do I think it's unbelievably important for a network like what you guys are offering to play a role in the world that we're moving towards, just talking about like the Web2 world and kind of how things are naturally progressing, I also think in regards to Web3, actually it's probably more important if, you know, for something like Kudos to play a role actually in that, and be somewhere where people can go and get their resources from, rather than these big cloud lords, call them whatever you want, you know. And where are you guys kind of at? So before I maybe go into where you guys are kind of at, we've spoken about AI somewhat.
Yeah.
Can you see the network that you guys are offering playing a role, or what are some of the ways that you guys see Kudos maybe playing a role in AI, if there is one? Because I did notice that Fetch AI recently published a report on what they call DePin. We like to put D in front of everything in crypto, like DeFi, decentralized physical infrastructure. And they actually mentioned you guys. Now, I know that Fetch have teamed up with SingularityNet and Ocean Protocol to create this like artificial superintelligence collective, which I think is really interesting. That's going to need infrastructure. And I thought it was very interesting that Fetch were kind of highlighting your network. So I don't know if you could maybe touch on how you guys are going to play a role perhaps in AI, if there is one. And then we'll look at where you guys are at.
Yeah, I mean, look, we're good friends with a lot of people within this industry. It's you know, whilst there's kind of thousands of dApps and hundreds of protocols out there, it's actually a really small community, right? So we all know each other pretty well. We know the team at Fetch, we know the team at Ocean as well within there. Fetch is also within the Cosmos ecosystem as well, so there's kind of even that, you know, even closer community, if you like. But yeah, it's exactly right. If you look at a kind of computing stack, it goes from everywhere from the kind of physical infrastructure at the bottom right up to the application layer. So if you're gonna create a full vertical you know, solution, if you like, or offering for the market, then you need that infrastructure all the way up again to the applications on the top. So you know, what Fetch offer, what Singularity offer, what Ocean are kind of in that kind of middle part. They're kind of the platform. They're you know, they're the models, if you like, for training language models and etc. So yeah, look, we are one of the infrastructure partners. You know, that's kind of that's our bread and butter. That's what we focus on, is, you know, that kind of physical infrastructure and making that available to the blockchain world. And it's not just Fetch. We've got integrations that have actually come from the Ethereum ecosystem as well. So we did a recent announcement, and one of our kind of weekly copy with Kudos, we call them on Twitter X, with VPS AI. So you know, that's come from the Ethereum ecosystem, and we've done one from outside of the blockchain ecosystem, but can still be used, like DStack and stuff like that. So you know, we're working with lots of different kind of service providers, if you like, that are offering that kind of value layer above, that might be at the platform of the application, and they're using our infrastructure below. Where we are right now, if I specifically talk about kind of Web3 audience, we are seeing a lot of activity on our network coming from people wanting to run validator nodes, for the reason I mentioned earlier, because we've got the geographical spread and we've got the vendor spread, and it gets away from that kind of AWS problem that you mentioned earlier, that some of the big protocols like Ethereum and Solana certainly had, at least up until, you know, kind of 12-18 months ago. I think they've managed to decentralize it a little bit more now, but because there was a bit of pressure on them, but you know, that was a big problem. And that was just because there was limited options out there, you know, first and foremost, right? So, or easy options, should I say, to be able to spin up on. But we're also seeing a lot of, you know, I think a lot of people are saying, oh, well, the vast majority of AI must be coming from kind of enterprises and outside the blockchain space. And, you know, whilst that is the truth, we're starting to see a lot more of that come into blockchain now. And the computing doesn't run directly on the blockchain because it wouldn't be affordable, but the actual recording of that and the logging of that data and where it's kept in a decentralized way is absolutely coming through the blockchain, right? So things like BitTensor, if you're familiar
Yep.
with that. So, you know, BitTensor is lots of kind of mining for machine learning workloads. I don't know why I needed the double quotes because it's exactly what it does.
Yeah.
But you know, it's so again, this is giving people another way to be able to really benefit from these new technologies. They no longer, it's no longer just, you know, these big hyperclouds that are able to kind of, and big businesses that are able to kind of really to scoop those or get a share of that revenue. Now I could go on with a single server connected to like the BitTensor network as an example, and mine for machine learning workloads. And what we're finding is that, you know, we're seeing an increasing amount of miners from those networks, from those kind of, you know, Web3 AI machine learning related networks start to use our infrastructure. So
Wow.
it's kind of, yeah, it's kind of those two areas we're seeing good growth.
Yeah, yeah, I love it. This is exactly what I knew this interview would be full of. You know, my excitement for doing this was it's been expressed throughout the interview because not only have we stressed the kind of importance of computing and what you guys are doing in the kind of world that we already exist in, we've also expressing it in the world that we're moving towards and the amplification of that and the crossover into Web3 and true to the kind of ethos of crypto, whatever you want to call this space, what you're seeing is the enabling of a more perhaps democratized and decentralized world where players that were currently sort of outside that moat, if you will, are now being able to kind of break down the walls of the castle and set up shop and kind of do that through a distributed ledger, do that through decentralized networks and the incentivization of that. And I think both Cudo and Cudos, both of the networks that you have going on, and there's a crossover there, are really a good showcase of all of that. I don't really want to go to, there is so much that me and you could sit here and talk about, and I don't want to bombard people with too much information and kind of go into too many other areas, although there's lots we could go into. What I really want to do is close on telling people where they can go to find out more about what it is you guys are doing. Obviously, we're going to leave links to Twitter, your website, everything in the description. But if people really want to get up to date and stay up to date in regards to what you guys are doing, where can they go? Where can they find yourself? Where can they find more about what you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to get up to date or stay up to date, then definitely head to our main website. So it's cudos.org, so www.cudos.org. So CUDOS. Type that into Telegram, type it into Discord, type it into X, formerly known as Twitter. I've still not used it, by the way.
I still call it Twitter. Yeah.
And you'll find us there, right? So Cudos. We actually do regular on X. We do regular spaces every Tuesday and Thursday. It is called Coffee with Cudos. So just subscribe, and then you'll see the invites come up. It's a good way to hear from a few of our team and get some updates. But you know, Telegram and Discord are always alive with information. If you're a project, let's say, that is looking for infrastructure and it needs to be able to integrate via an API, which we're seeing growing demand for, then you're probably better to go to kudocompute.com. So that's the underlying network, because that has the API tool in there that you'll be able to connect through, and then you have access to all of the infrastructure that's on that network. So yeah, hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You know, this has been eye-opening. This is exactly what I wanted to do, was to kind of explore this idea of cloud computing, how we're kind of decentralizing it, you know, how you guys fit into that kind of picture. And this has been an absolute pleasure. And I really do hope that we can get more of these lined up to kind of extend on some of the areas that we've spoken about. I mean, we could have probably done an interview on each individual area, but I really do hope we've delivered a kind of overview of the Cudos network and how you guys are kind of tackling the world that we're moving towards. So the last thing for me to do, Pete, is really thank you very much for your time. It has been an absolute pleasure, and I look forward to speaking with you soon.
Absolutely, the pleasure's mine. Thank you very much, and it's it's great to be in front of the all-in crypto community.
Yep, the pleasure's all mine. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Bye bye.